Back in the mid to late 80s, when I was looking to get myself a brand new SLR camera, things had been changing fast. Much of the traditional silver and black styling had gone, being replaced with stylised, all black, sometimes plastic, bodies. Many cameras had built-in motor winds, and some were even incorporating autofocus systems. I spent many hours poring through photography magazines to choose my dream camera. I had a limited budget, so there were only certain cameras on my shortlist. At that time I was young and foolish enough to believe that new was best, and all the funky new styling was a must-have, so a second-hand camera was out of the question. As I've said in my previous video, my preferred choice was a Nikon F-301 or F-501, but I ended up getting the very well specified Ricoh XRX, which served as my main camera right into the digital age, but I also quite liked the look of the Canon T series of cameras. I was probably only looking at the T50 or T70 on my budget, and I suspect that I ruled out the T50 due to its lack of manual control. Anyway, skipping forward to 2024, I've been enjoying reliving the 80s with my Nikon F-501 and its oh-so characteristic soundtrack, provided here by my F-301 because the F-501 has film in it at the moment. Sometime after I got the F-501, my brother bought a pair of Canon T50s, one of which he gave to me. I think it was jammed when he got it, but it was already fixed by the time it was handed over to me. I don't have a massive selection of Canon FD mount lenses, so I fitted this 35-80 Tamron Adaptall SP lens, which suits the camera quite well. Being a fully automatic camera, I couldn't check the shutter speeds on my shutter timer, so the best I could do was listen to the speed and observe how much it stopped down under different lighting conditions. Once I was relatively happy that it was working correctly, it was time to pop a roll of film in and head out for some test shots. We'll take a look at some of those shots in a bit, but for now I'll quickly go over the camera and its controls, which won't take long because it doesn't have many. On the front of the camera there's nothing apart from the lens mount, not even a lens release button because that's incorporated into the lens on FD lenses. Earlier ones using a breech locking system, and later ones using a weird combined system, fitting like a conventional bayonet lens, but the mating surface remains stationary as you twist the lens into position. On the top there's the rewind crank with the film speed dial beneath that. Press the lock button and rotate the dial using the knurled section at the front. Film speeds range from 25 ISO to 1600 ISO. You can also use this dial for exposure compensation if you feel the need, because that's the only control you have over exposure on the T50. In the middle is the hot shoe, and then we have the mode dial. L is for locked, and it's the closest thing to an off position that you get on this camera. Rotate to the BC position to check the condition of the batteries. If it bleeps rapidly, then you're good to go. Program is your only real shooting mode. The camera will select an appropriate aperture and shutter speed for the available conditions. With an f1.4 lens fitted, anything below 1/60th of a second will be shot wide open. Self is obviously for the self timer. Press the shutter button and the camera will bleep for about 10 seconds while you run back to the group you're photographing, increasing the frequency of the bleeps in the last 2 seconds before the shot is taken. The T50 doesn't have an exposure lock of any kind when you half press the shutter button, but it does appear to take the reading at the time you fully press the button in self-timer mode, so if you're prepared to wait around for 10 seconds you can use this as a primitive form of exposure lock. Behind the shutter button is the film plane index mark, and next to that is the frame counter. On the bottom is the tripod mount, the film rewind release button, and the battery hatch, containing 2 AA batteries, which is really good because if you forget to carry spares, you should be able to get some in almost any town. On the left hand side is the remote connector, which accepts the 60T3 remote switch, along with a few other accessories, but there's no bulb setting on this camera, so 2 seconds is as slow as it gets. The back opens in the usual way, pull up the rewind crank and you're in. You can see the metal vertical focal plane shutter in the centre. Film loading is very easy, as on previous generations of Canon QL or quick loading cameras. Drop in your roll of film. Push in the rewind crank, giving it a bit of a twist so it fully engages. Pull the leader across to the orange mark and shut the door. Set the film speed, if required. Set the mode dial to program and hold down the shutter button. The camera will then rattle off 4 shots, taking the frame counter up to frame 1. You can shoot these initial 4 frames individually, but during that period the shutter will fire at 1/1000th of a second, so unless it's bright you might not get the correct exposure. When you get to the end of the roll of film, the camera will bleep rapidly to warn you that you're out of film. Then press the rewind release button on the bottom of the camera. Flip out the rewind lever and wind the film back into the canister until you feel the resistance decrease as the film leaves the take-up spool. Open the back and take the film canister out. The viewfinder is nice and clear with a split screen focusing aid in the centre and a micro prism around that. On the right is a letter P that will show when you half press the shutter button. If it's glowing constantly, then everything is good and you can take your shot. If it's blinking slowly, your shutter speed will be 1/30th of a second or slower, and a tripod is recommended. If it's blinking rapidly, you're beyond the range of available shutter speeds and it won't allow you to take a shot at all. If you move the aperture ring away from the A position and half press the shutter button, a red M will appear in the viewfinder. In this state, the shutter speed will be set to 1/60th of a second, regardless of how much light is available. You could, in theory, use this with an external exposure meter to control the exposure manually, but in the case of my camera, it sometimes throws a wobbly and the shutter just sticks open. I've no idea why. It seems to be an electronic issue rather than a mechanical one, so I only use the camera in program mode. There's also a flash symbol that will appear if you're using a flash gun, but I have no intention of doing that. Apart from all that, the camera uses centre-weighted average metering. The shutter speeds range from 2 seconds to 1/1000th of a second, and the flash sync speed is 1/60th of a second. I think that's most of the features covered, so it's now time to look at a few shots. I put a roll of outdated Fuji Superia 200 ISO film in. I'd found a few rolls in one of my old camera bags. It expired in 2006 and it hasn't been stored carefully in a fridge or anything like that. The room it was in often gets hot in the summer and it's centrally heated in the winter, so not ideal conditions for storing film. There's no definitive rule for shooting outdated film. Overexposing by 1 stop for every 10 years is a reasonable starting point, but depending on how the film has been stored and what type of film it is, the loss of sensitivity can vary greatly. The ideal situation would be to get a batch of the same film and sacrifice 1 roll to shoot bracketed test shots, and then you'd know how to shoot the rest of the batch. Anyway, I rated this roll at 50 ISO and hoped for the best. So what's it like shooting the T50? It's actually a lot of fun. It's as if the camera is saying, let's not get bogged down with shutter speeds and apertures, leave that all to me. You just have to focus and frame up and press the shutter button. It's actually quite relaxing, and every time I use the camera it brings a smile to my face with its 1980s soundtrack and looks. Should you wish to empty your wallet, you can shoot in continuous mode by simply holding the shutter button down, unleashing a spectacular 0.7 frames per second. This obviously didn't sound impressive enough, because in the publicity material it was quoted as nearly 3 frames every 2 seconds. The T50 is a bit of a clunky sounding camera. It probably won't come over very well on the video, but there's a particularly harsh click at the end of the film wind. Compare that to the sweet sound of the Nikon F-501, which just sounds more refined, not to mention faster, at something like 2.5 frames per second, should you wish to empty your wallet even quicker. I think the noisy whine stems back to the A-series cameras, which also have a loud click at the end of the film advance, so the T-series probably shares some of the architecture from those older models. Okay, time for a few more shots from that first roll of film, and then a quick summary. Much as I love the older black and silver cameras, I also really enjoyed the adventurous new styling of the 1980s offerings, and the T50 fits in really nicely alongside my Nikon F-501 and my Minolta 7000, which has all of the buttons. The T-series all seem to have some odd choices as far as the user interface and available features are concerned. Well, the T50, T70 and T80 do at any rate, but you soon get used to the quirks on any camera. The T70 and T80 are on loan from my brother, and the T80 in particular definitely has Marmite looks. You're either going to love it or hate it, but it was one of their first forays into the autofocus SLR market. At the moment, these 80s pin-up cameras are rather unloved and subsequently are pretty cheap to buy, and the ones I've used are very capable cameras. You'll often be led to believe that the only camera that's any good is a Nikon F or Canon AE1 or of course a Leica, but there are some bloomin' good cameras out there for far less money. Anyway, that's enough waffle for now. If you've enjoyed watching, please like the video and maybe even subscribe to the channel, not forgetting to click on the bell icon so you get notifications when a future video is released. That's it for now, so thanks for watching and I'll see you in a future video.